Hi everybody, I'm Nick VanWagner, and I'm wearing my shark hat today because I'm going to be telling all of you a story. This one is called Old McDonald Had an Apartment House. It's about Old McDonald who lived in an apartment house. Alright, let's get started. Dedicated to all children everywhere, even those that hate vegetables. Old MacDonald lived in a big apartment house with his wife and their dog. He didn't own the building, Fat Mr. Rental did. He was the super. Old MacDonald polished the brass doorknobs when they got smudgy, mopped up the hallways when they got dirty, and sent up steam when it got cold. Old MacDonald's apartment was on the bottom floor, and it was very dark. The windows were covered by a thick bushy hedge that grew in the front yard, and without sunlight, his wife's little tomato plant grew pale and droopy. So one day, Old MacDonald decided to cut down the hedge in front of the windows, and with all the sunlight that came in, the plant straightened up and grew a few leaves, and even grew a couple of tomatoes. But the spot where the hedge had been had looked very empty, so Old MacDonald's wife suggested that they fill it with her tomato plant. And that they did. It grew lots of new leaves, many more tomatoes, and much taller. Why not get rid of the rest of the hedge, Old MacDonald said. Then instead I could plant vegetables in the yard. They're better looking than the hedge, and much better tasting too. So he cut down the whole entire hedge, and in its place he planted rows of corn and melons and beans and radishes. The fountain became a self-watering pea patch. The front yard had become a small farm, and the tenants were amazed. But one day, one of the tenants named Mrs. Katz didn't really need 4 rooms anymore. Her children were all grown up, so she moved out. It occurred to Old MacDonald that an empty apartment would be a perfect place to grow lots more vegetables. He quickly moved in some soil and proceeded to redecorate in late vegetarian style. He laid down a carpet of carrots and cabbages and put down some sweet potatoes where the couch had been, and stuffed the closet with mushrooms. That's kind of gross. A couple of days later, Mrs. Katz's downstairs neighbor, Mr. Hopkins, turned on a faucet and got hot and cold running sweet potato vines. Above his head, he could see carrots popping through the ceiling. He became furious. "Either the garden up there goes, or I go," he screamed at Old MacDonald. But Old MacDonald didn't really care. He'd begun to feel that in some ways vegetables made better tenants than people. Carrots didn't smudge brass doorknobs, cucumbers didn't leave muddy footprints in the halls, and potatoes didn't bang on the radiators for more steam. Angry Mr. Hopkins moved out. And a variety of vegetables, a field of clover, and even a cow moved in. No one knew what Old MacDonald was doing, but you can't keep a cow a secret for very long. Can you imagine a cow living in your house next to your room, eating grass and making noise all night? You wouldn't be able to get any sleep, would you? More and more people moved out, very disgusted with what was happening. So more vegetables, fruit trees, cows, and chickens took their place. Finally, every tenant in the building had moved out. The apartment house had become a 4-story farm. How cool would that be? Then one day, Fat Mr. Rental came by to check on the house and collect the rent money as he did every few months. When he saw that his tenants had been replaced by vegetables, fruit trees, cows, and chickens, he got upset. He got very upset. "Look here, Old MacDonald, what have you done?" he shouted. "Where are the families? All that's here now are bushels of fruit and vegetables, herds of cows, and flocks of chickens. And they can't pay me the rent." Old MacDonald and his wife were very sad. They knew that they would have to leave. Fat Mr. Rental had told them so. In fact, he was going to have the whole farm thrown out into the street. Old MacDonald told his wife not to cry near her tomato plant because the salt water wouldn't be good for it. Plus, it set a bad example for the cows. Wait a minute, I didn't know cows could cry. That's interesting. Fat Mr. Rental paced back and forth quickly in front of the apartment house. He was very upset and not really sure that he liked the idea of throwing the farm out into the street. Old MacDonald had been such a good super. Now, not only was he without a tenant, but he'd be without a super, too. "Who's ever heard of a farm in the middle of the city? That's insane," he muttered. "Or is it? Maybe a farm could pay me rent after all." The next morning, Old MacDonald and his wife stepped outside the house carrying their suitcases, and in the middle of the front walk, Fat Mr. Rental was building a store. There was a big sign that read, "Rental and McDonald's Fruit and Vegetables. Fresh milk and eggs hourly." Fat Mr. Rental waved at Old MacDonald and shouted, "Where are you going, partner? You grow the stuff and I'll sell it. Vegetables will pay me rent after all." On opening day, the store was jammed. Fat Mr. Rental made a very long speech in which he asked everyone to come in very often and to buy as much as they could. He asked Old MacDonald to say a few words, and he did. He said, "People, I am happy to have such fine vegetables as tenants. I hope you agree that good vegetables make good neighbors." The people applauded and then began to buy as much as they could. They came back day after day. Both the store and the farm thrived throughout the summer and fall. And even in the winter, when the earth outside was frozen and covered with snow, things were still growing on the steam-heated farm. That was Old MacDonald had an apartment house.